thanks a million, Niall. I hope the weather up there is a little bit better than down here. I'm down in Macroom, just at the gateway to West Cork, and the wind is howling outside. So I'm just hoping that the internet connection holds up and you'll be able to hear me. So if you have any problems with sound, just shout very loudly, and we'll try and pause and get it started out if needs be. Hopefully it won't come to that. First of all, I just want to say thanks so much to Helen and Bill and Niall and everybody at the Historical Society up there for inviting me to talk. I know this was meant to happen a long time ago, back up earlier in the year, but obviously circumstances got in the way of it, and pandemics and things like that. Only a pandemic would stop me going to Terryglass. So I'm very pleased now to be able to talk to you here. And it's, as Niall mentioned, I'm a Corkman, so it's probably no harm for a Corkman to do a talk to a load of Tipperary people from distance anyway. So just in case things get too spicy. But yeah, so thanks first of all for having me tonight, and thanks to everybody for taking the time for tuning in on a Sunday night. For me, I suppose Bloody Sunday 1920, it's over the years, I suppose I've been researching it and kind of been involved in various projects, the book included, for the last 9 years now, from beginning to right now. So it's you know, I suppose my personal interest in it has deepened and deepened over the years. When I started out on this journey, I suppose, or this project, it really started from working. I worked for the Sunday Times as my day job, and I was covering the Ireland-England rugby game in Croke Park back in 2007, and I was at that game, and obviously around that time with the England coming to play in Croke Park and all the symbolism around that, there was a lot of talk about Bloody Sunday, Michael Hogan, the circumstances of the shootings and so on. And what I noticed in a lot of the coverage at that time was there was a lot of contradictions. Even the number of people who was killed, there was 14 people killed in Croke Park that day, but some of the reports even in 2007 said 12, 13, 10. Some of the names of the people were kind of mangled up the years, if you like. Michael Feary, for example, was one chap. His name was Michael Feeney, depending on where you read it. And it kind of just struck me that this was one of the biggest events, I suppose. It's certainly one of the biggest events in GA history, and one of the most significant events in the history of that revolutionary period in Ireland. And it just struck me as peculiar that something almost hiding in plain sight. We thought we knew a lot about it, but we only really knew a little bit about it. So it struck me that there was a piece of work to be done there. So the book was 3 years in research and writing and so on. And the first edition came out in 2014. And luckily enough, we've been able to bring out an updated edition this year now. In the 6 years since, from 2014 to 2020, I've been very lucky. I've been able to meet so many family members of the victims who died on that day, and learn so much more about them. And I've always had a strong belief, particularly since towards the end of writing the book and in the six years since, that to get a real understanding of Bloody Sunday and to really feel, I suppose, what that event was like and what its significance was, it's so important to understand where the victims were coming from, who they were, what they went through, what their families went through afterwards. Because I suppose Bloody Sunday in November 1920, on the 21st of that month, it didn't just end that evening. It was like throwing a stone into a pond for a lot of those families. The ripples went out and out and up through the generations. And maybe some people didn't talk about it, but they carried the stories. The families carried the stories in all sorts of ways, shapes and forms. And hopefully we'll have the time to get into those as we go along. What I'm hoping to do, what I'm planning to do, is essentially go through just a little bit about the background to where we were in 1920 in terms of the War of Independence. We'll talk a little bit about Dublin and Tipperary, the teams. Obviously then what happened on Bloody Sunday itself. Why did the British authorities go to Croke Park of all places that afternoon? And the reaction, I suppose, afterwards, the funerals. There was 2 inquiries as well into the shootings. And I suppose the legacy up to now, how it's impacted on the country, how it impacted on the families, as I mentioned, and just where we are with it now in the centenary. Where does it sit with us? How can we kind of engage with this topic that maybe was different to previous to now? So to start, as I say, maybe just to give a little bit of background to 1920. In November 1920, and by the way, I'm acutely aware a lot of the people who are tuning in this evening probably know a hell of a lot more about the War of Independence than I do, and may well indeed know an awful lot about the minutiae of detail involved with a lot of the individuals and the people involved in Bloody Sunday. So I always find that really a really good thing, because these stories, these histories, they're always evolving, because so many of these stories, particularly around Bloody Sunday, have been either held within families or just left dormant or lost, that we can always add a little bit more to it as we go along. So November 1920, by that stage the War of Independence had been on since January 1919, so nearly 2 years. In terms of numbers, the RIC at that point numbered roughly around 10,000, just over 9,500. The army, the British Army in Ireland, was 20,000. It was considered a quite weak force. Obviously, Britain had gone through World War One, so the numbers in Ireland and the soldiers who were here, they would have been described as quite low morale, quite inexperienced. Really not the caliber, if you like, of men who might have gone to war in 1914. Police, if you think about it in terms of Tipperary, and this is quite relevant when you're trying to run a Tipperary football team, the concentration of police in South Tipperary by 1920 was more than any other area of the country per capita. There was one policeman per 243 residents, I think. There was a couple of thousand soldiers poured into Tipperary as the War of Independence unfolded. Obviously, it was a very active place, as we know. And that had a knock-on effect for the playing of football and the just a general life of people in Tipperary at the time. March 1920, the Black and Tans arrive in Ireland, a force pulled together to beef up the RIC, who were losing numbers. Had the RIC itself, a lot of the barracks had been basically pretty much cleaned out of the countryside and moved into very strong kind of urban fortifications. So the Black and Tans were brought in to augment that. The auxiliary force came in July 1920. They were more targeted. They were described as an officer corps, if you like, for the Black and Tans, but they were more targeted towards the IRA and going after the IRA more so. And equally significant, I mean, we've all been reared on the stories of the Black and Tans and the auxiliaries. I don't think I need to go into the role they played in the War of Independence, but I think almost of, I wouldn't, maybe not so much equal significance, but certainly huge significance at this period of time, summer 1920, is the emergence of a very effective intelligence service from the British side. Ormond Winter has been put in charge of putting together a group of intelligence agents to come to Ireland. They do a 6-week training course in England in Hounslow, out near Heathrow Airport, and they're brought over to Ireland during that early 1920 period and embedded into the community, the very, very same way as the IRA were embedded into their community, and in the same way that the IRA drew sources and information and put hits together, and from that information, the British intelligence service were doing the same. They were targeting the IRA in a similar way to the way the IRA were targeting G Division, for example, in the DNP. So by summer 1920, the auxiliaries are actually going quite well in terms of upsetting the IRA. The intelligence service are getting closer and closer to Michael Collins and the hierarchy of the IRA. The IRA's intelligence services operated out of Crow Street in Dublin, which is such an audacious place to have your HQ. It's just down the way from Dublin Castle, just off Dame Street. But at this point, the intelligence services, the spies, are starting to get very, very close. They gather a lot of the time in bars around Grafton Street. One, of course, is famously the Cairo Cafe, where the Cairo Gang expression comes from. And I suppose it's one of those things about Bloody Sunday. It was one of the shorthand sort of descriptions of what happened in the morning was that Collins wiped out the Cairo Gang. It's not the case. A lot of the people who would have frequented or would have been seen in that photograph of the Cairo Gang that's gone around for many, many years, a lot of those weren't hit at all. But again, it just became a handy, I suppose, way of saying, well, this was the British intelligence service, the Cairo Gang, but it was far more spread out even than that. So by the time we get to October 1920, November 1920, Collins in particular is very aware of the degree to which the British are getting closer and closer to the hierarchy. The IRA are under pressure. And the way I always describe it is that at that point, in the War of Independence, the IRA were almost like a boxer on the ropes. They were back up against the ropes, and they needed to strike back, and they needed to strike back hard in a way that let the British know that there was still a war going on, and that they were still a serious foe. So this is where the Bloody Sunday attacks in the morning come from. In the end of it all, there was a lot of targets put together. The final list was about 35. We'll never really fully know how many people the IRA targeted that morning, because there's no record of there's no actual list to go back to, but we're led to believe probably around 35. So IRA cells are put together based around Collins's IRA squad, who up to that point have been carrying out targeted assassinations of British intelligence agents, police officers, various attempts on people in positions of power. They are the main people, but there are others brought in from IRA divisions and IRA groups in Dublin. So they're brought together on the Saturday night. They're given their targets, and the following morning, 9 o'clock is the time when they spread out across the city to various boarding houses, hotels, private houses to kill spies. And in a lot of ways, what happens on Bloody Sunday, including the Croke Park aspect, which obviously we'll come to, but even the morning killings really bring home, I suppose, the brutality of that war. This wasn't shooting across a trench. This wasn't shooting across no man's land. This wasn't shooting someone you couldn't see, an invisible enemy. This was going into a house. This was pulling men out of their beds, putting them up against the wall and shooting them at point blank range. And this shooting and killing was done by IRA men, very young men. I think of Vinnie Byrne in particular, 38 Upper Mount Street. They went there to kill 2 spies, Ames and Bennett. And Vinnie Byrne was 19 years of age. He led that group there. And the way he described it down the years, he brought the 2 of them into a back bedroom, said, "May the Lord have mercy on your souls," and then he shot both of them at point blank range. And the autopsy reports from that particular attack showed that both men were shot 7-8 times. In a lot of the cases of these attacks, some of them worked, some of them didn't. Some volunteers, some of the squads called to houses, the people weren't there, so they just went away. In some cases, there are allegations of mistaken identities, but people essentially were shot in front of their wives, mistresses, children, landlords. This was, as I say, killing at its most intimate, and there has been work done since by the likes of Anne Dolan. Fantastic paper she wrote about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, connected to some of the IRA men who were involved on Bloody Sunday. This was not something that they did and walked away from. This was something that stayed with a lot of them for the rest of their lives. In terms of the morning killings, one more that's worth mentioning is Paddy Moran. Paddy Moran led a group to the Gresham Hotel, where they killed 2 men upstairs in the Gresham. And after that killing was, after that execution occurred, I should say, Paddy Moran left the Gresham and more than likely went straight to Croke Park, or very, very close to it. He might have had an hour or 2 to spare. But he went up to Croke Park because his team, Dun Laoghaire Commercials, were playing in a county intermediate football final replay. It was the curtain raiser to the Dublin Tipperary game that we'll discuss in a second. Paddy Moran went there. He was the chairman of Dun Laoghaire Commercial, so it was a huge day for them. It was their first county final, and it turned out to be the first county title they ever won. I've got a couple of slides here that I'm going to try and hopefully share with you in a fairly seamless way. But I just want to show you a picture, if I can, if it'll come up. Of course, always in these things, when you do it, you can practice these things a million times, and when you press it, then it doesn't happen. Let me try that again. Apologies, everybody. Here we go. There we are. Hopefully you can see Paddy Moran in the top right-hand corner. He's second from the right on the very back row with the flat cap. That's Paddy Moran, literally hours after leading an attack in the Gresham Hotel with his team, Dun Laoghaire Commercials, before a Dublin Intermediate football final. So this is the question, I suppose, that emerged as well. The question was always was there any connection between the morning events and the afternoon events? And through the research, we found that there was some. Paddy Moran being one. Another very direct connection is the Dublin goalkeeper, Johnny McDonnell. Johnny McDonnell was part of that Vinnie Byrne group that went to Mount Street. It was a group that was put together at the very last minute the night before. So as a result, they went to, I suppose, the IRA group that they trusted most, which would have been gathered a lot. It would have had a lot of O'Toole's footballers, and O'Toole's were a team that would have provided the bulk of the Dublin team that time. Johnny McDonnell and his brother Paddy were both veterans of the Rising. Johnny was known as the man in the cap. He was a famous Dublin goalkeeper at the time. But Johnny was on that operation that morning, and once it was over, he went back home, gathered up his gear, and while all the other IRA guys were told to scatter and hide, Johnny went and hid again in plain sight, went out and stood in Croke Park to play a game for Dublin. And hopefully I can share this screen with a bit more seamlessly than the last time. And Johnny is in the back row, is this chap here, if you can see my cursor. That's Johnny McDonnell. That's the Dublin team picture. It was taken before. That's the Bloody Sunday Dublin team. To talk a little bit about those two teams, the Dublin team at that time, I suppose, were a lot like the Dublin team up to just recently. Huge expectation, didn't always get as far as maybe people expected them to, but they were still would have been one of the top 2-3 teams in the country. Dublin Tipperary coming together was a huge match. Tipperary had been in an All-Ireland in the 1918 All-Ireland final, but in a kind of a dark, I suppose, parallel. The 1918 All-Ireland final was delayed by Spanish flu, so they didn't get to play it till February 1919. And Wexford were their opponents, Tipperary's opponents that time, going for 4 in a row. They were the first big football team at the time. And Wexford won that, but only by a point. Tipperary pushed them very, very hard. So Tipper, a serious team in 1920, coming back, serious contenders for an All-Ireland. By that stage, because of the troubles, a lot of GA games had more or less ground to a halt. The inter-county, the All-Ireland Championships, the provincial championships, Dublin had made the 1920 All-Ireland final by November. Tipperary, the Munster Championship, hadn't gotten off the ground because of trouble in the province, but also because of the death of Terence McSweeney, who was on hunger strike. Cork County Board called off all their games, and then the Munster Council followed suit. So there was no matches to play. So it was one of these things that Tipperary needed a game, and Dublin were the kind of team that they would pick to play. To try and put Tip in a modern context, I always think of the likes of a Donegal in the last 10 years, or maybe Armagh the previous decade, a team that just came together at a particular time. They were strong, athletic, talented team, very much based in the south of the county, of course, where football has always been a stronghold. I've just put up the picture there. I hope you can see them. Mick Hogan, by the way, is, if you count in the back, he will be, I'm going to go up by the players. So he will be the fourth from the left in the back row, where he's kind of in behind two players, kind of his head is poking out. We don't have many high quality pictures of Michael Hogan, unfortunately. So that will be among one of the few pictures we do have of him. But Tip would have come. It was an interesting way the game was even put together. Tipperary would have beaten Dublin in a couple of challenge games in the previous years. But somehow, who knows how this happened, but they got wind that Dublin had been, how would we say, I suppose in 21st century parlance, had been trash talking Tipperary, that they weren't taking Tip seriously as an opponent. And Tipperary didn't take this very well, so they wrote a letter to Sport newspaper, essentially calling Dublin out. Said, we've heard that Dublin are, basically saying we're not as good as them. We'll play anywhere. I think I have it here, actually. We understand that Tip's superiority over Dublin in football, despite 2 decisive victories by Tip, is being questioned by Dublin. We therefore challenge Dublin to a match on the first available date in any venue for any object, which is just the most fantastic way to arrange any match. And I'd love if there was a few more games organised in that way going forward, more like heavyweight boxing contests rather than kind of nice and polite competitions and things like that. So that's what brought them together in Croke Park that particular winter's day. It was a challenge game to just try and keep themselves ticking over, essentially. But it was a big game because there was no matches. It was a big game. So over 15,000 people turned up. Huge occasion. But as you can imagine, coming into Dublin after a bloody Sunday, on a bloody Sunday situation, having what had happened in the morning, Dublin was chaotic. Dublin Castle had been engulfed by employees of the British administration, civil servants, policemen, and their families looking for safety. They took as many people into Dublin Castle as they could. When they ran out of space, they put people in hotels in the area. The talk going around the city was, well, if the IRA had essentially wiped out the intelligence service in Ireland, which was what people thought had happened, well, then no one is safe, and we all need to find safe. We need to go somewhere safe now. The city was shut down, no trams, no one could go in and out. It was basically a city under lockdown, wondering what was going to happen next. And that's the key thing here. And it's the key thing to the whole of the War of Independence. By November 1920, the one thing people knew for certain was that if either side, IRA or the British authorities or the police, did something, the other crowd were going to react. It was atrocity followed by reprisal, followed by atrocity, followed by reprisal. So the only question that afternoon was where the British were going to go. What are they going to do? That said, no one really expected Croke Park, because no more than now, Croke Park was somewhere that you went to watch a football game. It was somewhere that you kind of went to get away from your kind of workaday stresses. And the worst thing that would happen in Croke Park was that your team would lose, and that's how people would have gone to Croke Park. The last thing they would have expected was a convoy of black and tans and auxiliaries to turn up and open fire on the crowd, to the point that the IRA actually got information through the Dublin Metropolitan Police that there was some kind of a force coming to Croke Park. And three of them, Harry Colley, Tom Kilcoyne and Sean Russell, went to Croke Park, and they found Luke O'Toole, the General Secretary of the GA, and they said to him, they just told him what they knew, that there was a force coming. They didn't know what, and they didn't know their intentions, but they're coming. It's up to you what you want to do. Now, Luke O'Toole, while looking back now, it seems a very straightforward choice to make. We have to think like that. Nobody expected firing. Nobody expected death. Nobody expected this. And also at that stage, people would have been used to black and tans and auxiliaries driving through their town or their city, intimidating people. It was part of daily life. So the question that the IRA men put to O'Toole, and they did urge him to stop the game, empty the crowd and send everybody home. But O'Toole was more concerned with, well, there's a huge crowd here. Getting people out of the ground could actually be more dangerous than anything that occurs as a result of the police coming. Also, you can even think about it in terms of today. I mean, people will be looking for refunds. How can we possibly refund people in a sort of in an orderly way, in a safe way? All these questions were running through his head. One of the IRA men did say, imagine if the machine guns opened fire, what a terrible thing that would be. But even at that, certainly O'Toole and the people that were there didn't seriously consider this might happen. Now, the Tipperary team, some of the players did know even the night before that something was going to occur, and the following day they would have been aware of it. Tommy Ryan, who was an IRA volunteer, played midfield for Tip that day, had actually helped to transport guns and ammunition the night before for an operation. He didn't know what the job was, and actually he volunteered for the operation, but he was told to go back and play your football game. Dan Breen, who knew Ryan, asked Ryan did he want to come down the country with him that morning. Ryan refused. The Dublin team, the same. Tom Ennis, who was a very prominent IRA figure, was also involved with O'Toole's GA. He went to the Dublin dressing room and he asked the Dublin players, and Paddy McDonnell in particular, who was a team captain, would the lads step away, don't play, But again, the Dublin team decided no. Come what way, we're going to play our game. That's what we're here to do, and that's what we're going to do. So these conversations were going on. Luke O'Toole, in the heel of the hunt, decided a kind of a halfway house decision. He decided to close the turnstiles to try and limit the crowd, which they did. But on that happening, the crowd started to pack in, and the crowds are swelling around the turnstiles, and it was actually getting dangerous outside. And also the turnstile operators didn't know why they were being told to close the turnstiles. So one of the IRA men was actually going up Clonliffe Road, and he saw one of the turnstile operators taking severe abuse from the crowd outside for not letting them in. And this man kind of went away, came back, threw his hands up in the air and flicked open the turnstiles, and people started entering the ground again. And I suppose that's essentially where the moment, I suppose, where we could have limited the crowd and potentially reduced the potential for loss of life occurred. But as I say, no one could possibly have known what was going to unfold. Why did the police go there in the first place? In Dublin at that stage, IRA activity was actually quite depressed. There wasn't an awful lot going on. Yes, Collins was based there, and all the senior figures were based up there, but the war was really being waged in places like Tipperary. So the British authorities really felt that this could not have been a Dublin IRA job alone. It had to have a wider scope. So they saw this Tipperary-Dublin game. They considered the possibility that people could have come up from the country under the guise of going to a game. And so they chose Croke Park as a place to effectively just shake a few trees, perform a search operation, see what tumbles out. And that was the whole plan, was to go to Croke Park, stop the game, search everybody, and let them all go then. That was the plan. But of course, that's fine. And that's fine in theory. Both teams, Tipperary and Dublin, had IRA veterans on them. It's important to say as well, Tipperary also had a World War I veteran on their team. And the crowd itself would have contained people who would have been sympathetic to the IRA, who wouldn't have had any interest whatsoever in politics, was just gone to see a game, and others who were kind of somewhere in between. No more than now, the GA was a very, very broad church back then, and the crowd would have reflected that at the time. So the plan was for the police to go, an individual to go out with a megaphone, stop the game, explain it was going to be a search operation. There was a military presence to surround Croke Park to make sure that the exit would be orderly. But of course, it was doomed from the beginning because, as I said earlier, people were used to seeing Crossley tenders carrying auxiliaries in black and tans, but they also knew not to hang around if they saw them. So the minute that these trucks appeared, people started running. So if you can imagine Croke Park, the geography, I'm sure all the Tip people are well aware of Croke Park, all the trips they get up and down there every year. From the Canal Bridge on the Joneses Road side, which is now the Hogan Stand side, you would have had what's not the Hogan Stand wasn't there, but you had a kind of a long stand, a bit of a pavilion. Running down along the canal, you had a small low wall. Basically from the Canal Bridge, you could see entirely into Croke Park, all the way down to what was Hill 60 at the time, which was a mound kind of in the corner, which would have been, we say, the corner of the modern Hill 16 Cusack stand, that area. The Cusack stand was a bank with a 7-foot high wall at the back and a 20-foot drop down into the Belvedere College sports grounds. What Hill 16 now was essentially just flat wasteland with corrugated fencing on the back. So when the Black and Tans arrived, the first truck parked on the crest of the Canal Bridge, and the rest of the trucks snaked all the way back up Russell Street and what's now Fitzgibbon Street, all the way up there, back down towards Gill's Pub and all the way along. Obviously, the plan was for the police to jump out, form lines, and then take their orders. But I suppose in that moment, the police, those men in those first few trucks had the power to decide what was going to happen next. And they decided that it was going to take a very, very different route. The first groups jumped out. They took positions on the Canal Bridge. Another group jumped out and ran down a little laneway towards a set of turnstiles that were kind of at the corner of that kind of the modern Hogan Stand, I suppose, and the Davin end, that canal end. The men on the Canal Bridge immediately started firing into the ground. The Black and Tans and auxiliaries who ran down towards the turnstiles jumped the turnstiles, jumped the walls, and immediately began firing on knots of people that were running away. It was a carnage, and it almost seems not enough. There are no words to describe what happens in the following 90 seconds. Random shooting, guys shooting from the hip, people getting shot in the back, running away, people who survive shot. One man lost it, he got his heel shot off. People got their hats shot off. One RIC constable, a ricocheted bullet hit him in the chest. It went through his notebook. His cigarette case saved him. His whistle got dented. It was absolute carnage. As I say, 14 people were mortally wounded. I'm just going to bring up a picture here. We can maybe start talking about some of these people. The person on the left is William Robinson. As you can see, that's his mass card. William Robinson climbed a tree in that corner that I mentioned between of the canal and the Hogan. Climbed a tree, and as the trucks arrived up onto the bridge, we know from the autopsy report and the trajectory of where the bullet went through that he would have looked around just probably to see what the noise was. But a shot rang out, and he was more than likely, almost certainly, the first victim of Bloody Sunday. He was 11 years of age. He lived on Little Britain Street in the middle of the city. The little boy on the right-hand side is Jerome O'Leary. He was 10 years of age. He was sitting on the canal wall a little further along from William, and he would have looked around as well, more than likely to see what was going on. And as he looked around, a second shot rang out and hit him in the head and killed him instantly. We'll move through some of these people. Tom Ryan on the left-hand side here. When the shooting started, everybody ran towards what we would now know as Hill 16, the Cusack stand end of the ground. There was exits up at that top end. Michael Hogan, for example, was running for a ball with Frank Burke, the great Dublin footballer who he was marking. They hit the dirt when the firing started, and they were crawling, trying to get to the picket fence that ran around the pitch at that time, jump the picket fence and blend in with the crowd. But Hogan was shot in the back as he was lying on the ground. And in that instant, as he was shot, maybe seconds afterwards, this man on the left, Tom Ryan from Wexford, ran across and whispered an act of contrition in Hogan's ear. He was shot as he was crouched over Hogan, and he crawled away and he died in hospital later on. Tom Ryan, incidentally, was another man. He was an IRA man. He was actually on a job that morning as well that didn't come off, from Glenbryan in County Wexford. I'm hoping that you can see, I'm just going to move. I'm hoping you can see the pictures okay. I just couldn't see them there just with my screen here. This chap on the right-hand side is Daniel Carroll from Templederry. 31 years of age. That's his sister Mary with him. He was living in Dublin. He worked in a bar in Drumcondra. He had actually gotten out of the ground. He was on Russell Street walking away when a shot from one of the lorries hit him in the leg. And he survived, was taken to hospital that evening, survived through the Monday. His employer, Martin Kennedy, visited him. They had a conversation. Daniel told him what had happened. And in fact, Daniel had been in the pub that afternoon before the game, and he was humming and hawing about whether to go to the match, but he was a big Tip supporter. He would have gone to a lot of games. But what he said to Martin Kennedy that Monday afternoon in the hospital was, wasn't it misfortunate that I went? And he died the following morning. These two men, Joseph Traynor on the left-hand side was from Ballymount in Dublin, just round about where the Red Cow is now. He cycled into the match. He was 20 years of age, played football, as you can see, for a team out there called Young Emmets. He was also an IRA volunteer, incidentally. But he was shot. He was trying to climb over the wall at the back of the canal goal. And he was shot twice as he tried to climb that. He was carried down to a house on Sackville Gardens, which is the next row of houses behind the Cusack stand. It's still there now. There's a plaque that he was taken to. And he was taken by ambulance to a hospital later. He died on the way to hospital. James Matthews is on the right-hand side. He was a labourer from North Cumberland Street. He was that 7-foot high wall that I mentioned, going along the back of the Cusack stand. He was going along that wall trying to get down to the exit. He went to the match with a friend, and they were both trying to climb the wall when James was shot in the leg, and he slid back down into the ground and died inside in Croke Park. He left a wife with two kids, two daughters, and his wife was actually pregnant with their third daughter in November 1920 as well. These two people, Jane Boyle on the left-hand side. Jane was 29 years of age. She was engaged to be married to a Tipperary man called Daniel Byron. Now, Jane, according to her family, was a real dub. She was really into sport, and she was really into being a dub, and Daniel equally as a Tipperary man. So they were due to be married the following week. So I guess if you can imagine, if you were getting married, you want to get away from the hurly-burly at home. So they went to the game. But when the firing started, they both started running towards an exit at the junction of the Cusack and Hill 16 ends. And Daniel recalled afterwards that Jane's hand was in his hand, but when the crowd surged, he felt her hand slip away from his, and then there was a volley of fire, and he lost her entirely. He was carried away by the crowd, and Jane was shot and trampled and died. She was actually buried in her wedding dress the following Thursday. The man on the right-hand side is Tom Hogan, 19 years of age. He went to Croke Park. He was from Limerick originally, from Tankerstown. Went to Dublin sometime in 1920 as a carpenter, but got work as a mechanic. Hurled for a club called Rapparees in Dublin for a while. From a very strong IRA family in Limerick. It's suggested that he joined an IRA unit in Dublin, but there's no definite proof, I don't think, to corroborate that. But he certainly came from a very strong IRA family. He was shot in the shoulder, and he was the last victim of Bloody Sunday. He survived until the following Friday. They had amputated his arm. He died a very, very, very sad, tragic, and painful death. He was buried in Drummond Cemetery, above in Limerick, kind of near Kilmallock. I'll come back to that picture there shortly, but that's the main. That's, I think I went through about 9 of the victims there, just to run through the other 5 with Michael Foley. And I'm talking about that group, that crowd as being a broad church of people. Michael Foley served 2 tours of duty in World War I. He actually went to the game wearing his British Army uniform, or his fatigues. He had a large overcoat and his cardigan and his British Army issue boots and trousers. He lived on Gardner Place, which is just up 5 minutes from Croke Park, just off Mountjoy Square, in a tenement cottage, the poorest of the poor. He sustained a really horrible thigh wound. He managed to crawl out of Croke Park, and he bled out on the canal bridge itself. Someone brought him into a house and an ambulance took him away, but his body actually remained in a morgue unclaimed for 4 days until someone came to get him. Others, the other 4 who were killed, James Burke from Windy Arbor near Dundrum, Dublin, was crushed in that attempt to escape. What had happened was the firing was coming from the canal corner, but also on the St. James's Avenue side, that corner of Cusack Stand and Hill 16, there was an armoured car outside, firing into the air, trying to push people back in, because as far as the army were concerned, there was still a search operation to be done. But of course, you now had people running from one side, from one direction, and a crowd being pushed back in on that crowd from another direction, and that caused a fatal crush that claimed the lives of James Burke and also James Tehan, who was from down near Ballingarry, kind of Gurtnahu kind of area down there in Tipperary. John William Scott was 14 years of age. He was shot and killed by a ricocheted bullet. He just walked across the road from Fitzroy Avenue, which is like, so many of us have walked down Fitzroy Avenue, I'm sure, on our way to Croke Park to matches. It's directly across the road from the Hogan stand. And the last person I want to mention is Patrick O'Dowd. He was 57 years of age. He was a labourer from Buckingham Street in Dublin. But Patrick O'Dowd did a remarkable thing. I mentioned the 7-foot high wall at the back of the Cusack stand. On the day when everybody ran away, and rightly so, Patrick O'Dowd was the one man who didn't run. He climbed to the top of the wall, and instead of dropping down the 20 feet the other side, as hundreds and thousands of people around him were, he started pulling people over to safety. And we'll never know how many people he saved, but we do know that the last person he saved was a soldier who was presumably off duty and went to a football match to watch it. But he pulled that man over and dropped him down the other side. And in that motion of dropping him over, Patrick O'Dowd was also shot, and he landed on the last person he saved. So that was the 14 victims. As I say, 90 seconds of shooting. They did perform a search operation that day. But the official version, I suppose, to move on to that, I'm conscious I'm watching the time. I hope I'm not losing anybody. The inquiry reports, there was 2 inquiry reports subsequent to that, but the initial reaction reflected everything that followed, certainly from a British point of view. The first reports from Dublin Castle that night on the Croke Park shootings said that first shots came from inside the ground. There were 30 revolvers, they claimed, found inside on the ground in Croke Park, and that the police were reacting to firing from inside the ground. That was essentially the explanation. And to varying degrees, that was the story they stuck with through thick and thin. The reality was that there was no revolvers found in Croke Park. There was one gun was found in a nearby garden, presumably thrown away by somebody, because there were IRA men in the ground who had been involved that morning, as we know. A very interesting report that got buried really at the time was by Major Edward Mills. He was the officer in charge of the auxiliaries. When all the firing was over, by the way, the Tipperary team were corralled at the Hill 16 end up at the railway wall that we can kind of still see behind the new Hill 16 and the Nally end there. But they were corralled at the end. The Black and Tans, there was a group of Black and Tans lying in front of them, pointing guns at them, and they were ready to shoot them. There was absolutely no doubt that they were ready to kill these players, and some of the players were preparing themselves to die. When Mills arrived on the scene and walked in between the two lines of players and the Black and Tans, and he started talking to the Tipperary players, and he started asking them what was the score, and stopped with Bill Ryan, the right half back for Tipperary, and said, "Are you cold? Here's a jacket." And he said, "There's been too much killing here today." And he turned to the Black and Tans and said, "I'm taking these men into my custody and they're leaving." And he walked the Tipperary team back to their dressing rooms, where the Black and Tans had already rifled through all their belongings, taken cigarettes, watches, whatever, cigarette cases, bits and pieces like that. And they were just left to go out into the cold. But Mills went back to his HQ in Beggar's Bush across the city and wrote a memo saying that there had been no firing, they found no guns, and that the entire affair had been in excess of what was required, and that the fault essentially lay with the Black and Tans. We never heard that memo again. We never heard that report again. As I mentioned, 2 military inquiries were convened very soon after it in Jervis Street and the Mater hospitals, which was where the bulk of the dead and wounded were taken. 35 witnesses, 28 testified in front of both inquiries. We're talking RIC officers, Black and Tans auxiliaries, spectators, Luke O'Toole, the General Secretary of the GA. And the upshot of all of that was 2 reports, which essentially stuck to the original story. I'm paraphrasing slightly, but I'm just going to read a piece from the Jervis Street report. The Jervis Street and the Mater reports were essentially almost identical with their conclusions. Firing was started by civilians unknown, either as a warning of a raid or with the intention of creating a panic. But at the end of the report, they did say that the police reaction was in excess of what was necessary. But the whole idea of looking in deeper to what had happened, that wasn't part of the plan at all. And it's interesting, literally around the same time, the British Labour Party had sent a delegation to Ireland to look into this atrocity reprisal spiral and British governance in Ireland and so on. And they went to Croke Park and they interviewed a lot of people who had been in Croke Park as well. Their findings was the complete polar opposite, that this was, again, I suppose, an example of the inability of the British to govern in Ireland, that there was a fundamental problem with how Britain were governing Ireland now. And this Croke Park was a tragic example of that. Those reports that I mentioned, Jervis and the Mater, were sealed until the late 90s. No one got at them for the guts of 70, 80 years. When they were opened, a Canadian academic, David Leeson, did an absolutely outstanding paper, basically just forensically going through them and decluttering them and putting it all back together in a way that we could see a picture of what happened on the day. And it's hard to find it online now, but I would strongly urge anybody who can find it, it's well worth a read. And I would always, for my own book, I did lean very strongly on that, and I would give huge credit to David Leeson for the work he did in terms of showing us that the shooting could not have come from inside the ground. That, the balance of evidence is that the first shots came from the Black and Tans on the Canal Bridge and killed William Robinson and Jerome O'Leary, and after that killed 14 others. To move very quickly on to the funerals, the families were told no shows of strength, no flags, no banners, no nothing. Close friends and family. And that was the case for the bulk of them. However, in the case of Joe Traynor, in the case of Michael Hogan in Grange Mochler, of course, who was an IRA volunteer, and in the case of Tom Hogan, the IRA did perform shows of strength. They fired volleys over the ground, over the graves. In the case of Michael Hogan, they stood vigil over his glass-lidded coffin. That was, he was in the coffin wearing a very strip donated by his teammate Jack Kickham. And yeah, so that was the case there. If you contrast that to the British agents who had been killed on the same day, they were carried by gun carriages down the quays, taken by warship across to Wales, and then carried to London, where they were buried. Their funerals were in Westminster Abbey and Westminster Cathedral, and then they were buried. So it was quite different, two very, very different looking situations when it came to the funerals. And essentially, in terms of the Bloody Sunday victims from Croke Park, that was it. When I was finished the research on the book in 2014, I saw that there was 8 of the victims were in unmarked graves, which again, it really hit me on a gut level, because I thought this was something that was so intrinsic to sort of your understanding of the GA, to your understanding of the War of Independence, even if it was only a footnote in the history books to what occurred in the morning, that Michael Collins really dominated the Bloody Sunday story, and the Croke Park aspect was sort of reduced slightly as a result. But the fact that 8 of these people were buried in unmarked graves was extraordinary to me. Now, there was reasons for that are very understandable. In some cases, economic reasons. You just couldn't afford to put a gravestone up at the time. Some families wanted to wait until everything had died down before they went and put up a gravestone in their own time, in their own way. Other families were afraid of reprisals from Black and Tanzan soldiers if they knew that family had a connection to what had occurred on Bloody Sunday. So there was a world of reasons in that regard. But at the same time, I mean, 2 of the children, John William Scott and Jerome O'Leary, were in unmarked graves. So when the book project came out, as I said, the book came out in 2014. In 2015, the family of Jane Boyle actually began the process, in a way, I suppose, of putting gravestones on these graves. They took it on themselves to put one up for Jane Boyle. And with the assistance of the GA, they put the gravestone up, and kind of from that, the Bloody Sunday Graves Project was born. And essentially what that has been families, if they want to put a gravestone up or a marker for their loved one, the GA will help them in whatever way they can, and we kind of just try and bring it along in the best way we can. 7 of the 8 unmarked graves are now are marked, and going to those ceremonies over the last 4 years, in particular 5 years, has been extraordinary, because you see in a nutshell how Bloody Sunday is still relevant to this day. I've come across families that some of them have never stepped foot inside Croke Park, that they were told by aunts, uncles, mother, father, that Croke Park was a bad place, that bad things happened in Croke Park, and they never had a connection to Croke Park. All they knew was that something bad happened in there. The sense of sort of closure for some families, because a lot of them would have tried to contact the GA and tell them their story, and maybe their story wasn't passed on, or they would have felt that they had been ignored and alienated, and they were frustrated by that down the years. And in a lot of cases, you had people erecting gravestones, and they may not have known the person who was killed on Bloody Sunday, but they would have known an aunt who knew them, or a sister or a brother or a mother or a father who told them the story and who kept the story alive all through the generations. And it was for them that they were as much putting up the gravestone. And there are highly emotional occasions, but there is a wonderful sense. I don't want to say closure, because that's for the families and the individuals to say themselves, but there was certainly a sense that the right thing was being done. And from a GA perspective as well, the GA after Bloody Sunday largely closed the book on it. There was the odd word of condolence at a following county board meeting or so on and so forth, but there was no great sort of exploration of what had happened. What you found was that Bloody Sunday might have been brought up at county board meetings or at big speeches in a way to sort of make the GA look more Irish than other sports, that the blood of the martyrs had been spilled in Croke Park, and that, you know, the police and the military had come to Croke Park. They hadn't gone to Lansdowne Road, or they hadn't gone to anywhere else. They had come to the spiritual home of the GA to strike at the heart of Irish nationalism, if you like. But in a lot of ways, I suppose with the 21st century ahead of you, I've always thought that the GA weren't really ready to process what happened. But through the Bloody Sunday Graves Project, they've been able to reach out to the families and re-establish those connections and achieve a greater understanding that what happened was an appalling tragedy, but that the people who went to the game that never came home. They needed to be embraced. And the way that we can embrace them now is by remembering them through the Grace Project, but by talking about them and by knowing more about their lives and sharing their story with people. And very much so, when we look at the centenary of Bloody Sunday this year, that is very, very much the drive behind what the GA are doing, what they're trying to achieve in terms of commemoration. You'll see their GA website has a Bloody Sunday hub now that has a huge amount of information on all these victims. They've been releasing little videos every week for the last 4 weeks, and will go on for the next 6 weeks, I think, depicting each victim, just trying to bring, put a face to the name almost. It's just that simple, and bring a more human feel to the numbers, because we were just reared on the numbers, the thing, it happened and we move on. And the GA were a bit like that. It happened, we move on. But we now have an opportunity 100 years later to slow down, step back, and safely feel this grief, this trauma, try and understand how it impacted on people. I'm just going to share a couple of last pictures and I'll just chat over them. This picture, as I mentioned before, this was the Tipperary team the year after Bloody Sunday. Tip and Dublin played a commemorative game all the way up until the early 70s. This one took place in 1921. Exact same referee, exact same everything. And the players here are gathered at the spot where Michael Hogan was killed. So that was from 1921, November 1921. Mentioned the Bloody Sunday Graves Project. This is just an example of one of the graves, Daniel Carroll from Templederry. As I say, he was killed on Bloody Sunday. You can see his sister Mary, who he was very close to, who was in the picture earlier on, is buried with him. And I just want to finish off with a story about this lady. This lady is Nancy Dillon. I mentioned earlier on, as you can see, it's a grave for James Matthews. James Matthews, his wife, as I mentioned earlier on, was pregnant with their third daughter. And Nancy Dillon, it was James Matthews' third daughter. She never met her father, but she was reared on the story of her father's death and the impact that it had on her family for many, many, many years. And in 2016, we were lucky and able to erect a gravestone, and it was just such an extraordinary thing to have Nancy there, to see her father's grave marked with a picture. The wonderful family occasion for them, and just incredibly poignant to see one direct link with Croke Park and Bloody Sunday there, to remember her dad. And it's as simple as that. I'd like to thank everybody for listening. This is not some kind of cynical marketing ploy at the end, but just to let you know, if you are interested in learning more, the Bloodied Field is there. As you can see, it's available in all the bookshops and o'brien.ie/the Bloodied Field. But I'd like to, as much as that, I'd like to point your attention to the website ga.ie/Bloody Sunday, where you'll find out a lot more about what went on in Croke Park, and an awful lot of the characters and the individuals who were there and who were involved. We've also been working on a Bloodied Field podcast. If books aren't your thing, we'll have an 8-part podcast coming out probably in the next 10 days, but it'll live on that ga.ie/Bloody Sunday website area, and it'll be on Spotify as well. I'd just like to say again, thanks so much for listening. I know I've kind of flown through stuff there a little bit, but I think often with Zoom, it's not like being in a hall where we can slow down and chat and talk about different things. Sometimes with Zoom, it's no harm just to get to the detail. But I'd be delighted to answer any questions at all. I am conscious that I kind of raced through a lot of stuff there. But thanks so much for taking the time, and I'm really, really happy to been able to have the opportunity to chat to you all tonight. So if there's any questions at all, fire away. We're good to go.
Hello, Michael. Helen Fox here again, and hello to everyone. I disappeared there at the beginning of the talk. I had to take a phone call. That's one of the things with Zoom as well. You need to turn off the phones. It's not like in the local hall. And as Michael had said earlier, this was to take part in March, and I suppose everything changed for the whole country at that stage. But I'd like to thank Michael for allowing us to reschedule this through Zoom. And I suppose, as it would have been lovely to have it in the hall, the fact that we have this technology has allowed people from right around the country to join us that may not have been able to come to Terryglass. One day, Michael, we might have you back again for another talk in Terryglass. But it is great, and we'd like to thank everyone for joining us here tonight. I think, as Michael had said there in his talk, I think it was absolutely brilliant. One of the things, I suppose, with the whole decade of commemoration, I think for all of us, is that we're actually learning not just the history, but we're hearing the human side. And when we were going to school, we got dates and facts, but we didn't hear the human side. And I think tonight we've learned so much from this. I do know that there's a number of people here who have family connections with the events of Bloody Sunday. And I'm going to stay quiet now. I know that if they would like to come in, there's a couple of people there. I think Jerry Wheelahan, you have a connection there with your grandfather, I think it was. He was umpire. If you'd like to come in.
So, Jerry, if you can unmute yourself.
If you want. I know it was a note, a chat.
Jerry, you're still muted. Can you unmute yourself there so we can hear what you're saying?
Okay.
Perfect, thank you.
Hello, Jerry.
Yeah. My granddad was an umpire that day. He wasn't supposed to be, but that morning was very tense in Dublin, and we were told not to carry ID. And he played for Dublin, and he went on to play for Westmeath. We didn't really talk about it that much afterwards, you know. And it's only in later years that kind of, when he died, it came up, and we kind of went back and researched it a bit. Now, his brother may have been an umpire on the earlier match, but a linesman at the earlier match, but we weren't able to confirm that, you know.
Jerry, you did send us a photo of your uncle at, I think, Niall, you have it there. He was playing with Westmeath. Yes. We might bring it up here.
I'll bring that up now.
Granddad, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, and you can see Tom Whelan here. And there is another man, Pete Whelan. Was he a brother, Jerry?
He was a brother. Now, he may have been a linesman at the earlier match. There was a kind of an earlier county match that day. Tommy had played for Dublin as well previously. He was from Westmeath, but had gone to work in Dublin. And he returned to Westmeath probably in around that time. So he couldn't play for Dublin. He was playing with Westmeath again. It wasn't something, and I think Michael fell it there, it wasn't something that was talked about an awful lot. It only come up in really later years, you know.
We found out an awful lot with people when you kind of spoke to maybe grandsons or grandnephews or even sons and daughters of people who would have been there on Bloody Sunday. They didn't talk about it. And again, I think that's, there is an element of sort of our generation now. We're in a position where we can talk about it. You know, we can kind of revisit this in a different way, not in a cold way, but in a kind of in a way that it's not going to hurt us the way it may have hurt those people. Again, I go back to that idea of post-traumatic stress that would have impacted on the IRA men that morning. I have absolutely no doubt from the conversations I have with people who would have known some of the men who played on the day, that for some of them it had a huge impact on them. And I mean, there's no doubt, even, you know, umpires, linesmen, referees, and it's funny because, you know, the umpires and the linesmen are kind of forgotten in all this. The referee was Mick Salmon. He was a Kildare man. He played football for, actually, he won the All-Ireland. He won an All-Ireland medal in 1919, and he refereed the game. But we don't hear a lot. There was actually, funny enough, there was a very unusual story in one of the newspapers about the umpires the following week, that two of them, a man in the crowd claimed that two of the umpires had been shot as well and hadn't been included in the list. Now, I've gone back and tried to trace those individuals, and there's absolutely no sign of them whatsoever. But it kind of just gives an indication again of sort of, you know, how things sort of got moved around and the story kind of changes a little bit. But it's fantastic to have a connection. And again, it's fantastic to have a connection to one of the umpires, Jerry. And it also shows, I think, how national this is. This isn't just a Tip Dublin thing, you know. This is something that, you know, we had victims from Wexford, Limerick as well. And, you know, we had a referee from Kildare and we had umpires from Westmeath.
Jerry, just on that, and I think, Michael, you said it to me earlier as well, that, Jerry, Tommy Whelan's son is still alive. He's 94, is he?
He is, that's right.
Father Mark.
Well, he was Christian Clement, but he's ordained Father Mark. Still in England. He's very much with it.
Yeah. Well, I hope that, because this is going to go up on YouTube, and please God, maybe he'll be able to see it. And just coming up on our screen here is Una McNamara. And Una, you told me your father was in Croke Park that day.
Yeah. Hello, Helen, and thanks to Michael for a great talk. Yeah, my father was from Roscrea. He was the youngest in his family, and his older brother was in Dublin. But they were staying, I think, in the end of Grafton Street. They were living in. They were apprentice in gents outfitting, and
Right.
the women, they were staying in with the women one side of the house, and like the guys one side, the men the other side. So he was in Dublin on the day. Now again, like that, he didn't speak very much about it. I think it was Hill 16 he was on. He jumped off something, lost his shoe. That's all. Unfortunately, he lost.
Yeah.
So, you know, and interestingly, today would have been his birthday. He was a William Francis.
All
Today
right.
was his birthday, and at the time he was 18.
18.
Oh,
Yeah.
God.
Young men.
Oh, God.
Just I don't know, is Deirdre Sinnott there from the Sinnott family? Is there someone there? Maybe not. No, maybe.
Yeah, how
Yeah,
you doing?
Deirdre. Hi, Deirdre.
How you doing? I'm here as Deirdre. Carey is my maiden name, but I'm married to a Sinnott. My husband's family, some of them were there on the Dublin team, on Bloody Sunday.
I think was there 3 brothers on it, Michael? You were saying.
3 Sinnott
Yeah, the
brothers,
Sinnotts, the 3 Sinnott brothers, and I mean, you talk about Dublin football royalty now. I mean, the Sinnotts at that time would have been fantastic players. Stephen Sinnott, Stephen, Josie, and John, I think, were on, if I remember rightly, because there was more than them in the family, if I remember. But they were there, and in fact, I think it was Stephen. I think Stephen was very close to Michael Hogan when the firing started, and I remember going up. I don't know. Would you be related to Tony, Deirdre?
Tony is my father-in-law.
Yeah, Tony's a lovely man. I met Tony some years ago, and again, that question about, did they talk about these things and that? And Tony mentioned they didn't really talk about it much, but he said that his father did sometimes say, God, why wasn't it me? Why didn't I get hit? And even in God, there's a world in a small line like that,
Yeah. Thanks very much for the talk. It was very good.
No,
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mm.
We're all muted, are we? Well, I'll tell you another thing. I'll tell you another thing about Tony Sinnott, that we were at the house, and he had a few bits and pieces of memorabilia, but the one thing he had was a 1920 ticket, an original Bloody Sunday ticket, and he showed it to me. He allowed me to hold it for a minute, but it was absolutely pristine. It was like it was printed yesterday, and I came away. It was one of those moments when you're doing a thing like, I came away thinking, this story is so important to so many people. I mean, the ticket, to mind that ticket the way that ticket's been minded for the guts of 100 years at that point, just shows you what, even though people might know the ins and outs of the story yet, it just shows you what it means to so many people, and it still does.
Yeah, I've seen the ticket as well, and it is perfect. Yeah.
How are you, Michael?
It's immaculate.
How are you, Michael? You hear me there? You can?
I can, yeah. Hey, is that Ronan, is it?
Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. No, I just sent an email there to them. They're unmuted. And I don't know if Niall can hear me there now. I sent an email to them.
Hi, Ronan. Yes, we're trying to get that up. I'm asking to be forwarded to me, so it might take a moment. So we'll do it. We didn't know who it came from. Thanks for that.
Yeah. I just sent him a few of the photographs, Michael, the one with the string on it, with the medal.
Oh, yeah. Yes. You can tell that story, Ron.
Oh, well, you might tell a bit of me.
No. I'll tell half it and you can finish. I'll start you off. Ron's talking about Bill Ryan, was the right half back for the Tipperary right half back that day, and Mick Hogan was very, very concerned about having to mark Frank Burke, who was the Dublin corner forward at the time. And Frank Burke, like in modern terms, Frank Burke, you can just basically think about him as Colin Cooper, really. He was just a superstar. And Mick Hogan was only making his way in the tip team that time. Bill Ryan, though, was a fairly experienced player. So he asked Bill, will you mark Frank Burke? But the problem was that when the tip team were coming up the previous day, they had gotten involved in a scuffle with the British soldiers, and Bill Ryan's boots had got thrown out the window. So Bill had to find a replacement pair at short notice, and the replacement pair he got, they were too big for him, and they just weren't very good. So so Bill said, I can't, I'm afraid, because my boots aren't doing the job for me. So Hogan came to him one last time before they went out on the field, and Bill Ryan said, no, I just can't do it. I just can't do it. So Hogan went back to his own kit bag, and he produced a lace that he gave to Bill Ryan, and Bill kept it for the rest of his life. But Ronan, that lace went around the houses a bit.
Well, yeah, I didn't realise that lately. Bill's daughter, then, Teresa Ryan, she's head and hearty in Templemore here. So if you're ever any Ian Gray's funeral home in Templemore, she just lives there. If you're at a funeral here, you know where that is. And she's head and hearty, Teresa. She's in her 80s, but she's absolutely flying it. And I was only over with her there. I don't know how long was that, Michael? 6 months, 8 months, whenever it was anyway. And she pulled out her little box. And her Bill's medal is in it. And then 12 months later, they played an anniversary game. You had the photograph up there earlier. And they produced a special medal for that. And Teresa had Bill's medal. It was hanging on the lace that Mick Hogan gave her. Yeah. And that's in Templemore. I had it in my hand here a few months ago. And I sent a photograph to Niall there, so they're trying to get it up there. I just photographed the medals there, with the medals and the lace, the whole lot are in pristine condition still. She has them in a box there in the house. So she actually sent them off. She gave them to Crow Park after Michael there.
Great.
Joanne, what's her second name?
Joanne Clark.
Joanne Clark in Crow Park was onto her there. So she sent the stuff up anyway. So
it's actually...
Sorry, Michael. I have the photographs here, so just try and bring them up while you're talking. Talk away.
This is the lace then that Mick Hogan gave to Bill Ryan, and as Michael said, he kept it for the rest of his life. And his first anniversary medal is hanging on the end of it, which is, I think it's amazing to have that, you know.
It is, and I actually meant to mention it when I was just mentioning a couple of bits. I mean, the GA Museum, obviously Dublin's in lockdown at the moment, so it's we're not able to go into the museum, but they have an exhibition at the moment. I presume I haven't been up now, but I presume the lace will be in that with a bunch of other artifacts that they got from families and different people with connections. So there's a lot of stuff going on around this centenary to kind of try and connect to it now. And it's great because the lace. We wouldn't have been aware of the lace, really, Ron, wouldn't we? Not like only for.
No, and it was only kind of when she said it to me, I came back to you, and you had you find the interview with Bill? Hadn't he that lace in the interview?
He did an interview in 1984 with a local historical society below in Tipperary, and he held up the lace. I think with his Munster and All Ireland medal that time. I think was attached to it. But anyway, so we knew it was there. And Bill, of course, was the last of that Bloody Sunday team to pass away. And the one thing I remember about that interview that he did, you know, when it came to Bloody Sunday and all those things, like all he remembered was the people, the friends that he lost. Do you know what I mean? The matches and all Ireland medals and the things kind of went away. It was the friends and the people that he knew that he lost were the people that he remembered, was what he remembered, you know.
And even I'd say too, some people would say sometimes about the authenticity of the lace itself, you know, they'd wonder, would like if you knew Teresa, I mean, you know, in my mind, there'd be absolutely no doubt about it. She's old school. She would have put those in a tin. I'd say they're in the tin for the best. You know, they're just, you just know sometimes without having to ask. You just know that they're the genuine.
Yeah.
In my mind, there'd be no doubt. And I know the person and I know her character. I'd say, absolutely. You know, there'd be no doubt about that, you know. Yeah. So I don't know. They must be still trying to get it up there, eh, lads?
Sorry, just on that.
Still working that one moment there now. Okay.
Right.
Talk away.
While you're working there, Niall, Niamh Hassett, you said your father interviewed Bill Ryan in the 80s and that he had the lace and medal in it at that stage, and it's available to view online on YouTube as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Are you there,
that's
Niamh?
right. Hello, I'm here. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's I have it on YouTube. I'll put the link in the chat. But it's about a 20-minute interview.
Okay.
And it's stunning, the detail Bill remembers. He was actually able to name the Tipperary team and the substitutes on the day. after, you know, and he was a very elderly man at that time, but his memory was razor sharp.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. I know. I met your. I know I met your dad, Niamh, back around that time. He gave me the DVD of the interviews and stuff like that. He would have actually known my father as well, so there was a connection there.
Well, we spoke, Michael, about your book, and he absolutely loved it.
Oh, did he? Oh,
he did.
That's nice to hear. Oh, here we are.
You should see the two photographs are there now. Okay.
Yeah, so that's the lace. That's the lace itself, and then the medal is on the right, which is the commemorative medal from the first anniversary match. That's the actual medal. They produced the match. If you zoom in on it, you can read all the detail on it. First anniversary was played 1921.
Amazing.
Yeah, and that's the medal. That's the lace. Then, and as I said, I believe it to be 200% genuine. I would have no doubts about that.
Yeah.
But it's funny actually too, because the Tipperary team in 1920 also, just as a footnote, they had 4 from Templemore.
You're going to take my thunder.
Oh, that's Roddy. Go on, Roddy. We'll let you tell that one.
Sorry, Ronan there. I was talking to Ronan. I remember meeting Michael when he gave the talk in the Macaulay Centre in Templemore a couple of years ago. And you have a picture of the team on the wall. But the one person that was missing out of the team and you were trying to figure out was Arthur Carroll.
That's right, yeah.
We were trying to figure out the reason. And the reason was there was a death in the family. And there was another person on that team, was Bill Grant. And he wasn't there that day either because there was a death in his family. And but if you ever get a chance, you should talk to Jasper McCarthy. You know McCarthy's pub in Feathered?
I know Jasper. Yeah.
Well, he can tell you lovely stories about Gus. And there's a picture, I think, in the back room of their pub of a High Nelly bicycle. And I think the bike was sent to Scotland for repairs, and they're hoping to cycle to Croke Park on the anniversary in the November the 21st, from Feathered to Croke Park. So, and your book, I remember reading your book. I gave you the words of a famous song there, Grange Mockler's famous son. That was the ballad of Michael Hogan. But your book is very good. And I remember when you were with the Sunday Tribune, if my memory serves me right, it was serialized first in the Tribune.
The bloody Sunday book, is it?
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, I was at the Tribune, but that was about 20 years ago. I'd say it was probably the Sunday Times. I'd say it was probably where there might have been a bit of the book.
Okay.
Possibly. But anyway, Sunday something.
Yeah. Well, excellent presentation, and you have great guests on there. Well worth watching. Well done.
Just another person coming in there is John Flannery, Ormond Historical Society. John, are you there? You have a telegram.
Hi, Helen. Just to say, there was a fantastic occasion yesterday in Mullinahone when wreaths were actually laid on the graves of 6 of the players from Bloody Sunday. But when I was down at it, I was actually handed a copy of a telegram which was sent by Jack Kickham the following morning. It was a nephew of his gave it to me. It was handed into the Central Telegraph office at 10:20 on the Monday morning, 22nd of November, and arrived in Mullinahone at 10:50. And it was addressed Redmond's Mullinahone. Match raided by military. Mick Hogan shot dead. All others safe. Casualties, 12 killed and 150 wounded. Can't get home. All trains stopped at present. Kickham. Not just particularly poignant. I thought, that the following morning, this telegram arrives in Mullinahone, and just people are told Mick Hogan dead. At that stage, probably most of them wouldn't have known anything. The newspapers wouldn't probably have reached Mullinahone at that stage. And suddenly this telegram arrives. And you can imagine just the consternation and, I suppose, pure fear probably. Is there going to be more to come out of this yet? And a sister of the man that showed it to me, she actually still has that telegram. I think it's a fantastic artifact of the period just to have.
Okay, so Michael, I think there could be the makings of another book. Thanks.
Oh.
For bringing that in. So.
Oh God.
I'm conscious that there's quite a lot of people there, and also that Michael has been talking for quite a while as well. But is there anyone else that wants to add anything?
Just one small thing, Helen. Isn't it amazing? The Grange Mochler this year. Yesterday they beat Torres Sarsfields in the county under 21A football final. Now, and they wouldn't have been in. Grange Mochler happened. I'd say if I'm back to the books, I don't know when last they would have been contested at say an A level final, and there you are in 2020 during the county final. Isn't that something?
Well,
yeah. They won the South Championship this year, which is probably the most difficult of the 4 divisions in Tipperary. It's the hardest one to do. You've got Clonmel and Mile Rovers, and they won the South Championship. They beat Torres yesterday. And wouldn't it be ironic if they would land the county final in 2020?
Wouldn't it?
Amazing the way things happen, isn't it? You know?
Yeah.
Okay, Helen, just checking in with you. It's time. It's 9 o'clock now, and just checking in.
I see there's just one question I think here that up on the chat that I might just answer while we're at it.
Yeah.
It's from Eddie Fanning, if Eddie is still there. Eddie is asking, did Michael Collins ever comment on the event? Surely he knew that there'd be a retaliation and that the match would likely be at risk. But funny enough, he's spot on, because Collins, after having a very late night kind of final detailed check meeting on the Saturday night, went to Phil Shanahan's bar below in the Monto in Dublin, in the inner city of Dublin, and went in and ordered. It was very late, so there's only a few left around, but he ordered a bottle of stout or whatever, and he told whoever was there not to go to Croke Park the following day. Just leave it. That just no particular details, but just to leave it, not to go, because there was it was a Tipperary pub and there was a few Tipperary people around who would have been going to the game. And the following day, bizarrely, Collins was actually in the vicinity of Croke Park that morning. He went. There was a prison warder from Portlaoise Jail, Maryborough Jail at the time, was passing on messages from the IRA prisoners in Portlaoise at the time, and thought he was meeting just an IRA contact in Dublin on Crossguns Bridge. If people are aware of the geography there, just at the top of Whitworth Road. But he arrived on the bridge, and there was Collins. So your man nearly collapsed when he saw Collins, but he passed on the messages, and then they made their way back in towards town, but there was checkpoints along the way, and as they were walking down through Philsborough, they walked straight into a checkpoint, himself and Collins. And of course, our man, the prison warder, was terrified. I mean, whatever about getting caught, he didn't want to be the man who got Collins caught. So he kind of rummaged in his pocket and found an old military barracks ID for Ship Street, and he flashed it at the soldier at the barracks, or at the barrier, and the man said, go on away ahead. So immediately they repaired to the nearest off license, had a stiff drink, and headed off in their separate ways. So it's amazing to think that Collins was that close to Croke Park, given what had happened in the morning, that he was in the vicinity.
Okay, so we're getting some noise coming in here, folks. Okay. Sorry, Helen, I'll leave it to you. I'm just trying to.
No, I was just going to ask if there's anyone else would like to say anything or have anything to share.
It happens, it all happens because
maybe mute that.
I'm trying to ask. That's the intention.
Done.
Okay.
I'm hoping, Michael, that you actually can see some of the chats and messages are coming in, because it's very, very positive. People have really enjoyed the talk, and I think we as I said earlier, we've got the human side of it, but we've learned a lot as well. And up until the time that you actually did your book, that was really the main research in Ireland. What you did up to that, there was very little done, except for the men who did in Canada that did the research.
Yeah, there was a book done in the 60s by James Gleeson. It was called Bloody Sunday, and it would have had reference to Croke Park and so on. But between then and now, there wouldn't have been an awful lot done. As I say, look, families and people who would have had a connection to Bloody Sunday would have held this story very close and would have curated and minded it down the years. But in terms of a wider audience, there wouldn't have been an awful lot. And you know, it's no one's particular fault. In fact, you know, even going back through it, some of the most difficult things to research are ages and basic simple things like that, because sometimes birth certs and death certs don't match up, and sometimes there's no birth certs at all, and different things just don't match up, and it's very, very hard to sometimes get a handle on even the very most basic details of the thing. But to my mind, all the information was kind of out there. It just needed to be sort of pulled together. And as I said at the top, you know, the book was written in 2014. There's an updated version with some changes and some extra bits in it now. And you would hope actually that as more information comes out, that we'll get more understanding of the people and what happened on Bloody Sunday, and to bring us closer and closer to sort of what happened and the real meaning, I suppose, behind the whole thing, you know?
Yeah.
This might be a good time to share the book again, Michael, in terms of, you've put so much work into it. So for those of you who are interested in buying the book, and we would recommend it, you can buy it online, or as Michael said earlier on, the local bookshops would have it too.
Would have it, and it has the updated one, of course, has the commemoration stamp on it. It is an excellent book, Michael, and please God, one day, as I said, we'll meet maybe and get you to sign it.
Be great.
Look, I think that's about it. Is it for this evening? There's no one else wants to add anything. And I think what we have to do is just thank Michael. We felt very disappointed back last March, but I think this has made up for it this evening. And I think again, the whole thing with Zoom, it allowed us to share photographs that we wouldn't have been able to get all of a sudden below in Terryglass, and different things like that, and get different people to talk as well from around the country. It is excellent. It's something that I suppose all this commemoration over the last number of years, as I said, is bringing this. It's bringing the human factor to it. I think tonight, Michael, you did an excellent job. I don't know whether you had a note in your hand, but it didn't look as if you had. I think
I've been well hidden. I
think it's well hidden in your head. I think you've lived and breathed it. And thank you so much. It's been absolutely brilliant. And maybe we leave the last word to yourself, Michael.
Absolutely. No, listen, thanks to you all. Thanks to Helen, thanks to Niall, thanks to Bill for the invite and helping just getting all the technical stuff organised and sorted out. And thanks so much to everybody for tuning in. Like, it's not an easy, straightforward thing to do, I know, but you know, I remember again, you know, when this book was done and you realised the stories of these people needed to be spread, you know, I'll go anywhere and I'll talk to anybody about this. You know, and that was always my intention. So I'm just really, really delighted to be asked to talk about it and tell their story, and really appreciate people listening and taking the time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Michael, and thank you to everyone. And again, thanks to Niall and Bill and everyone else that made this possible. And look, please God, we'll see you in Terryglass one day. Take care, and as we say, I suppose in this COVID time, do the three things simple: wear the masks, wash our hands, and keep our distance. And look, to everyone, stay safe. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right.